Well, welcome back to the Sean Trey Show. I have a really awesome guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and what you do?
Hey, how you doing? My name's Stephen Black. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. I'm a music producer. I've been building some hardware and some software along the way. Plus, work on my own music and helping produce some others at the moment.
It's awesome. Now, how did you get into music?
It's a good question. I think probably when I was about 15 or 16, everyone around me played music. So it was just something I wanted to get in on. And I was definitely the worst at it for a long, long time before I caught up. And, doing it every day, I just worked harder and harder to be able to try and get to where I am now.
That's a really great... There are a lot of people who come on that are in film or music or some other creative endeavor, and they're like, yeah, I just took to it naturally. I was the best. I just flew ahead. For me, when I started doing martial arts or like playing music or anything, man, I was not like one of those fish to water type. It was not like that for me. I had to work hard and put in time, and it's still... Things don't come easy to me, and that's awesome to hear that you have a similar type of an experience.
I was the worst.
How did you go about getting better then?
I think it was just constant practice, feedback, and I think surrounding myself with others that definitely knew more than me. I think a lot of musicians, they get caught up in being in circles where everyone's at the same level. For me, I try to always kind of surround myself with people, they're striving for the best, and they're people that I can learn from.
My friend Adam, I don't know, it was actually Adam's friend, Philip. Philip, in his interview with me, gave me a great bit of advice. He's like, hire your heroes. Like, try to really work with the people that are like you really look up to. Don't just aim here, this guy's kind of my level. Like, reach out to those people that are, inspiring to you. Because you never know, man.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I've studied 2 music degrees, and I think just being around in that kind of community, surrounded with people that are active in all these different projects, they've done this, they've done that. And they start to become your heroes in a bit. The people you surround with, so getting to work with them was always really good.
Yeah, I think so. And so, what instrument did you kind of dive in? What was the instrument or the outlet of music that you kind of went down?
Well, for me, I started on guitar, and that was kind of my main instrument for about 6 years. Then unfortunately, one of my main guitar, that got stolen, which was awful. But I took that as a chance I picked up like every possible instrument I could find so I could get in the guitar. So I think at the moment, I've got 20 plus instruments.
That's awesome.
To get home. So it's a bit of a balance, trying to play a little bit on each of them every day of the week just to try and learn something on them. But I think it's great because you approach every new instrument with a new mindset, and you kind of take something away from that. I can use it.
Well, what are some of your favorites that you've picked up?
The flute was an unexpected one for me. I think I just found like a really cheap one in a pawn shop. Thought, I'm going to grab this. This is going to be awesome. I played a little bit of didgeridoo. That's always a fun one. And I guess like my new instrument that I'm exploring more than anything is probably synthesizers. So I've really gone down the rabbit hole on that one.
That is a huge rabbit hole, man. It's an awesome rabbit hole. I follow Moog, and I just, some of the stuff that they built is amazing, man. And the people are putting together is amazing. And I love watching the page of, I think his name is Hans Biger, and he's this really hardcore synth guy out of Germany, and he's putting together these units that are like entire walls, and I'm just like, whoa.
What do you mean, Heinbach?
Yeah, is it Heinbach? I'm, I'm slaughtering his name. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. Now, why were you drawn to the synthesizer?
For me, when I was doing my recent music degree, I think synthesizers was something everybody around me was using. That's kind of where their knowledge was. And for me, I've never used one. I've never owned one. So I really wanted to get in on that. And at the time, I wasn't looking to buy one. So I know my approach to it was I started building one. And from
Awesome.
that, I really got, I think, the most out of it because understanding exactly how it works, I can start to plug it into different things. I'm actually developing an understanding of how all that works. And then I built some software ones, and it's been the last 2 years.
So tell me about that, because that's really interesting. Like, did you study electronics as well to be able to build these things, or was it just like, let's take this thing apart and let's put something together?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. Like, I've broken a lot more things than I've built or fixed. So I do I'm a little too easy with the screwdriver sometimes, pulling things apart, seeing how they work. But I mean, the information out there, it's all online.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. For me, trying to understand some electronics, I had to go down to like kids' books to try and get a basic understanding of the electronics. Mainly more for the safety aspects. The last thing you want to do is plug something into a wall and that's it. So,
sorry. That's awesome. My friend and I were having this discussion, and he and I were talking because we were getting ready to interview this other gentleman who builds amps and an analog gear, which is really cool. He's got some really beautiful stuff, and one of the things we were thinking about was like, well, how did he get into that line? And my friend Tim was like saying, I'm pretty sure I know how. And I was like, how? He's like, well, a lot of my friends that are building stuff started with taking stuff apart. When something would break, they're just like, oh, hey, well, it's broken now. Might as well see what's on the inside and see if I can fix it. And so he said they were taking apart mics and taking apart ribbon mics and taking apart all this stuff and just going, what's on the inside here? And, oh, wow, this isn't that complicated. Maybe I can make something like this. And then they started to, and, voila. Now you have this guy who's got his own brand of mics now or something, or an amplifiers or something, because started off with just taking it apart. Now, was that similar to your path?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, if I find something that doesn't work, I'll try and fix it. You generally fail at that, so it generally becomes a project where I'm turning it into something else. Like at the moment, I picked up an old VHS camera that I'm doing a little bit of repair on. My goal for that at the moment is to plug it into my synthesizers and create a tape loop, so to record audio reactive visuals from the VHS camera.
That's awesome. And tell me about that, because I've been seeing people do this with synthesizers right now. I saw someone, that old toy, the Furby, it was just like, and someone built a synthesizer that was running all of the sound through the Furby, and it was just creating this eerie sound. But it was just like, I was like, wow, that's super creative. You know what I mean? Because why not?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that YouTuber. Looking on the computer, he's got some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And he's an amazing guy with how he puts out his projects, because he normally posts a lot of tutorials to try and help other people get into it. I really like, I guess, his catchphrase that he has in his videos, that's "Don't be afraid to try it."
Nice.
So I think that's one of the big barriers. I think people getting into that stuff, they don't know anything about electronics. They're not kind of sure where to start. But that's exactly how you start. The first kind of things you build, they won't work.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to make them work, that's where you develop the understanding of why isn't this working, how does this work, and you start to build from it.
That's awesome. Now you said that you did 2 music degrees. What are the 2 different degrees or areas of study that you have?
So I've done a diploma in music performance, and at the moment I've just finished up a Bachelor of Music Production, so more the production side, whereas the other was more performance based.
Nice. Now for you, music production, what are some of the projects that you're really interested in right now that you're working on?
Well, there's definitely a lot of projects I'm kind of working on. A lot of them more are towards, I guess, designing software at the moment. Like I've been building
That's
new
awesome.
plugins at the moment.
Yeah.
Which is like, I don't even know how I got into that. It's just kind of something I started doing one day.
So did you study computer programming at all? Or that's awesome.
I had a really good teacher who helped me try and learn a lot of the coding aspects, and then I just found myself staying up till 4 or 5 a.m. every night, just drilled to the computer trying to fix this stuff. So I built a lot of audio reactive visuals, some software instruments. At the moment, my main kind of thing I'm kind of looking into with software I'm making is more about data manipulation.
Okay.
So trying to move a little bit away from kind of Western tuning. So whereas we've got like 12 notes on the keyboard, I've now kind of worked it so I could divide that across anything I want, become 24 notes, 11 notes, to try and kind of move away from that.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now, one of the things that you talked about that I want to, just for people who might not know, and I just had to quickly look up, was what is an audio reactive visual?
Basically, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's visuals that will react to the audio. So,
would this be like something like, back in the old, the old PCs, the old Macs, where you would have the visualizer and you put the music on and suddenly it starts having something dance around the screen?
Yeah, pretty much. So the way I've worked mine is it works very similar to an oscilloscope.
Okay.
So it kind of visualizes the waveform, and I've redirected that to form a 3D shape.
Nice.
So depending on the amplitude and the frequency that you kind of put into it, it starts to move around as an oscilloscope would, but it's built into that 3D shape.
That's awesome.
The user can have a bit of control over it, put a kaleidoscope effect on it, spin it around, have it react in different ways to the audio.
That's awesome. Now, what was it that inspired you to do that?
I think for me, it was just, I was getting really tired of staring at a blank screen when I was working on music. So I just wanted something visually appealing to look at. So I spent a lot of kind of hours trying to fix that for myself. So when I do work on music now, it's usually one of the things I've got up. Just, it's a little bit of side enjoyment for me to kind of be able to watch the music instead of just hear it.
That's really awesome. And that's one of the things that people, when I started learning Pro Tools and other DAWs, I would watch the sound wave pop up, and it was really interesting because we tend to think of sound as this thing that is, what we identify as sound, but people don't realize, people forget, is a vibration. And you can see vibrations, like when you put the sand on top of if you put sand on top of a sheet and then you put a speaker underneath, and you start seeing the actual sound waves coming out and creating these different forms and shapes as the sound waves interact with each other. And when you give people the ability to see things that they normally cannot see, it's really powerful, because people go, oh, wow, that is a tangible thing. It is a physical thing,
Yeah, I think especially with 3D audio kind of making its way into the scene a little bit. It'd be really interesting to kind of see that visualized from a 3D spectrum as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think next few years, I think that would be reality. Maybe like a 3D video. It'd be nice to have kind of a visual complement to that, because it's very mesmerizing being able to see something you would normally hear.
Right. Yeah. There's I always am drawn back to this one story of I don't remember where the story is from, but it could have been, who was the composer that went deaf? Was it Beethoven or Mozart?
It was Beethoven, but to be honest, I'm pretty sure they all went deaf.
Right, some point in time, right? Now it was interesting because there was like this one. He would react to vibrations at a certain point, and I remember this story about. I think it was a child. I don't think it was one of the composers, but this child started going deaf, and this child really loved music, and so the father brought this big speaker in and kind of just put it on the chest of his child, and it's like the child was able to feel the different musical vibrations, and it was a tactile thing. And if we could give people, the ability to see them, because I'm always fascinated by these new devices that are enabling people to regain lost senses. And there was this one device that was giving this child the ability to hear for the first time, and it was I think a cochlear implant of some sort, and you could see this baby who had been absolutely unable to hear for all these years, and suddenly they're like, all right, we're going to turn it on, and they're like, hey baby, and the baby's eyes just like, oh my God. And then just this baby who just is in this absolute amazement at the ability to experience something. And I've always wondered, like, do they hear in the same way we hear? You know what I mean? Or, because like we take that for granted, that the way we perceive things is the way other people perceive them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like what I see as you ever see those images where they flip the colors on something, and it's like a mirror image. And I was like, maybe that's how another person sees the world. And the way I see the world is completely foreign, And so we assume that the way other people interpret things is the same as us, especially with sound. And yet when you create a visual form, it actually is much more, I'm going to say, objectifiable, or like you can actually, there's more similarity to it. It's suddenly you're able to measure it, and it creates a degree of sameness to this beautiful thing that we all perceive, but we don't always necessarily perceive it the same way.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're definitely right. People perceive sound very differently. I think especially when it comes to music, there's so many genres now that people are into, and it's just some people love them, some people hate them. But it's like, where's the perspective on it? Do you hate something because you don't understand it? Do you like something because you do understand it? I think trying to dive into that, not understand why people like it, but understand the music as a whole, you learn to appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of it.
Well, and it's interesting because, even something as like, I remember taking this one class from Berklee College of Music, and they had this, and it was a class that I was like, oh, this is going to be a waste of time. And it was called The Art of Listening, and I was just like, whatever, man. I know how to listen, but no, I did not. It was quite overwhelming to realize how little I knew about listening. And there was one of the things that was as simple as panning music, and you'd think, well, you have something here. It's like it all comes at you. Wow, it's such an art to panning, and in each music genre does it differently. And one of the ones that fascinates me is I love to see how jazz is panned, because they pan it the way that you'd be watching a live band. You know what I mean? So, you have, the drums are kind of centered, but they're not. They're panned to a degree as to where that would be. And, is it a right-handed drummer or a left-handed drummer? You know, it's like, and so you get these different pans depending on that. You know, and that's something that, you know, a mix engineer has to think about. Like when you're mixing someone like, or producer or, you know, audio engineer, like, how are you going to mix Phil Collins? Because he's lefty, you know what I mean? And so, you know, it's completely different. And that's fascinating, because you start to get into these different layers of sound that we make assumptions a lot with music and sound. Like, this sounds nice. Well, does it? Does it sound nice to everyone? Because nice is completely objectifiable. And nice is also something that's conditioned. You know, why is the violin nice sounding? Well, because people grew up with it. You know, maybe if we grew up with other things, that would be the nice noise, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think there needs to be, I guess, a level of understanding or exposure to appreciate something.
Yes.
I think I've noticed. I actually did a little bit of a study on this, about music theory and whether people, how they perceive that. The general kind of notion is that those who hate it don't seem to know anything about it and openly admit that. Those that love it, they study it every day as their favorite thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of cross-reference that with a few other studies, and this other guy, he seems to believe that it's actually really fit. So kind of makes that flight or fight response based on stuff.
Interesting. Well, I live in Southeast Asia now, but one of the things that's interesting is when I started listening to, there's some music that has like Western influence, and so it's interesting because like the bolero music, which is still a traditional Vietnamese style of music, but that was adapted from the French bolero, you know, influence, and which the bolero actually didn't come from France, but the French brought it over with them. And what was interesting, though, is if I go back further, there's another type of music called Kailung. And one of the things that I experienced with Kailung is when I first heard it, I was like, what in the hell is this? Because the cadence, the rhythm, the tones, all of this, it was very foreign. It wasn't like the beat structure completely, you know, it was very different types of sounds. And at first it was very jarring for me to hear. Not because it wasn't good music, it was exceptionally well done, but it was different. And I think it was that familiarity creates fondness at times, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you mentioned the French brought it over, because I found that that's happened a lot in history. Because I know they introduced the harmonium into Indian music.
Interesting.
And the impact that had is they had to now adjust their musical system to more of a Western system, so everything could be in tune. That's played a huge impact on their music.
Because India didn't use the same, the same note structure, correct?
Exactly. It's very different. So some of the software that I'm making, it should actually be allowed, we're able for a DAW to actually align with that now.
That's awesome.
If you were trying to write like South Indian classical music in a DAW, you physically couldn't do it in a software instrument because the frequency is different.
That's interesting.
So being able to shift them and say, every time you play a C note, you want to pitch that a quarter tone higher.
That's really awesome, because you never think about that. And you know, one of the things that is interesting is that I will often tell people music, you know, is a language. For sure, it's a language. But we also tend to think of there being one music language, which is not true.
Yeah.
There is a host of different languages that are spoken with music traditionally, and we've kind of standardized them. And, you know, it's crazy that this is an effect of colonialism, but it seems to be, you know. These people spread their musical influence across the world. And, I mean, granted, if there is one area of sharing music, I think would be a good side effect. Not at the expense, though, of losing local music. So there's that trade-off.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting in the future, kind of how music shapes. Because I think there's already like a mass meshing of different cultures
Yep.
in music. And I don't think it's fair we kind of just refer to it as world music.
Right?
Because there is,
Right.
I think the culture does need to be respected, but there is some interesting music coming from mixing these different stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because I do not know why, but sometimes I will get advertisements like, what is it? I'll listen to, I'll put on some meditation music, right? But occasionally I like this one guy named Krishna Das, and he does some of this, it's like, the yoga community in the West kind of created their own version of kind of some of the Vedic like scripture type songs, and so, but it's not what they're doing in India. It was a Western adaptation of that. And what will happen sometimes is then sometimes I'll play one of these tracks, and all of a sudden, like, I'm getting Indian pop music advertisements that are popping up, and I was just like, whoa, because it has such a different tone. Like, not tones, like the tones are different, but it has just this different vibe to it. And, it's like, you're so right. Like, it's so unfair to classify it as world music, because that is nothing, in no way similar to K-pop, which is in no way similar to, traditional Icelandic music. It's so different.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like you said, there's no one music. It's musics.
It is, yeah. And that's so interesting, because we assume there is an assumption that, but I mean, look at that. It's even within the Western music styles, I can promise you that jazz, albeit there is, still notes, but the way you approach jazz, the way you approach rock, the way you approach hip hop is completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. How did you start identifying because some of the music you sent me had your own vibe to it. Like, how did you start finding your vibe of what you wanted to create?
That's a good question. It's something a few people have actually asked me recently, and the honest answer would be I don't know. I think just exposure to different music, especially, like, I can't use Spotify anymore because I listen to the most random music ever. So the recommendations for me are really strange. But I don't know. I think it's a lot of my approach to learning new things about music definitely comes from music that's more or less forgotten now. Like, I'm kind of researching a lot more of the older composers and their approach to it. Like Stravinsky's music, for example, I'm personally not a fan of. I find it a little abrasive, but I think some of the ideas that he explored are really interesting and really technical, that I just have to understand how he does it.
Well, and I think that there's a really interesting thing that you're bringing to the forefront. There was this great piece, the infographic that I saw, and what it was, but I will immediately then find fault in it, and I'm going to share what it is. So it's like, there was this picture, and it had just sheet music of Bach, and then right next to it was sheet music from Justin Bieber. And it's like, and it obviously, you know where I'm going with it. Like, the Bach was much more intricate, and the different layers per instrument, and then Justin Bieber was much more, it just, the notes were not moving around as much. But I was like, also, I would like want to point out to that, well, Justin Bieber is pop music. At the time of Bach, people were also listening to their own pop-ish, not pop music, but folk music at that time that was much less. I mean, Beethoven was the highest of the highs in his time period, and there are amazing composers who are also doing amazing musical scores at this time, so if you compare those people. But one of the things I'm getting at too is there was this a complexity to music that some of the older composers would have. And because, I mean, these were not the people that were just like glazing over. These people were deep diving, you know what I mean? In a time period where if you wanted to specialize in something, you did deep dive.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the ideas that Bach and Beethoven explored, they're almost non-existent these days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think through history we've explored different points of music and going into more depth over them over the years. Like we've kind of explored ages where melody is the dominant focus, or rhythm or harmony, whereas today with music production, it's all the music seems to be focused on timbre and how we can kind of shape those sounds. Which I think it's really unfortunate that things like harmony is kind of not a lesser focus, but it's not as explored as in depth as what it would. So for me, a lot of my approaches, I try to mix those two worlds. One, I explore both timbre and harmony, for example.
Well, that's something my wife and I, we sing. My wife is a singer here in Vietnam, and we do music together. And one of the things that we're big on, and it's interesting that when we send our music out to get mixed, so we'll record multiple levels of harmonies because we both love that. I grew up with my mom listening to the Beach Boys, and then there was this time period in the 70s and 60s where they were like all about the harmonics, the harmony lines and in the vocals. And so my wife and I will always do multiple layers. Even though it's a duet, we'll still record multiple layers of harmonies on top of each other because we think it sounds nice. It sounds beautiful to have these different harmony lines. And we'll send it to a different mix engineers, and a lot of times they'll just bury the harmonies. And they're just like, well, you guys are a couple, a duet, you're singing. You just want your vocals, her vocals. And it's like, but that's not the sound we want to create. We want to have these different harmonies. Well, who are the people singing when people are watching? Like, doesn't have to feel like it's live all the time. You know what I mean? We can just have something that sonically sounds different, nice,
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting how kind of people, they shift their focus towards a certain type of sound. Like people that are really into lo-fi, they'll put distortion on everything. Yep. They want it warped beyond everything, and they absolutely love it. Whereas people on the other side, they want everything super polished and it has to be perfect. Wildly different perspectives, but I just find that so interesting.
Right.
One person likes something, one doesn't.
Here's can I share an interesting example really quick? About it was something that's interesting, a phenomenon I noticed about what sounds right. When I listen to jazz, it's the craziest thing. You know how I want to listen to my jazz? On vinyl. And one of the reasons I want to is I like the old sound. Whenever I listen to Frank Sinatra on on streaming or digital or on CD, I'm just like, this sounds too clear, But when I get the crackly nature of the vinyl, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the way it's supposed to sound. And then with my rock and roll, like when I'm listening to 80s like rock, I love it on cassette. I love listening to it on cassette because that's how I grew up listening to rock. Was like, you put it into the cassette in the car and you're rocking out as you're driving down the street. That sonic quality is something that it's then becomes associated with the type of music, and it's 100% personal preference,
Yeah, it becomes a very emotive thing. I've found people seem, like you said, they're attached to having listened to it in a certain way, so when they listen to it, they have to listen to it on that medium. I think that's really interesting.
Now for you, like, you're creating some stuff that is really special, and I'm fascinated by creatives because I can create certain things, but like people that are creating absolutely new things. Like, there's a story about Alexander Graham Bell that it was from his wife after he passed away, and they're like, "What was it like to live with him?" And she's like, "He was a man obsessed. Like every single day, it was something. And if he wasn't creating something, he would just get into this place that wasn't good, because it was like he just felt like absolutely stagnant." And one of the things that, and I'm not going to lie, creating my podcast, I have felt so much brighter and happier and inspired. And that's bleeding into the other areas of the things I created in my life since I started making this podcast. Versus before this, there were days where I dealt with some depression, like, because I'm like, what am I making today? I don't have anything to work on. Now, how about you? How do you feel when you start creating? Is it an obsession for you, or is it something that you just like, oh, I'm going to try this? Is it all consuming or not?
Yeah, it's definitely an obsession for me, especially with the hardware. I'll find myself at 5 a.m. just looking around all the mess I've made. There's wires everywhere. I've pulled a million things apart. And I never want to go to sleep because, I want to finish this project. I want to keep learning about it.
Yep. I'm with you. Where do you go for your inspiration? In music and life, any of that?
I'd be definitely looking for something I don't understand.
Oh, I love that.
Because I think if I find something I don't understand, that becomes back, to an obsession. I have to figure out, what is this? How can I understand it? How can I enjoy this more? So it's not something just completely foreign to me. I think that's kind of where I seek inspiration, like whether it be writing music, a lot of old composers, I look at something like, what's 4-part counterpoint? That sounds crazy. I have to learn this. What's a voltage controlled amplifier? I have to build this.
That's awesome. If you could go back in time and find your younger self, give your younger self some advice, what advice would you give your younger self?
It's a good question. I think it would be, don't be afraid to try new things, and don't be afraid to take it upon yourself to learn new things.
Oh, I like that second point.
There's a lot of fear about pursuing something that you know nothing about. You're stepping into the dark, not knowing anything. But it's like, when I started learning, coding or building hardware, I spent probably a lot of years thinking about doing it, but never really did it. It's the exact second you start doing those things is when someone is doing it, as opposed to someone who's thinking about it.
Right. And there's that, like, once you do it, like, we were always, for my wife and I, we've always been dependent on other people writing stuff for us, other people, creating things for us. Lately, in the last couple of months, I started writing more stuff for my wife and myself. Still working with my friend Fu, who's an amazing guitarist, and he has all of the theory that I do not have, And so when we work together, though, but I've written some, I think, are beautiful songs for my wife and myself. And now I can literally call myself a songwriter because I have done it. Once you experience it, once you've stepped through that door and you have created something. And I posted this week, I posted the first song that I wrote for my wife and my daughter, and it's up on streaming. And I was just like, wow, I'm a songwriter now. And it's like, that's a cool thing. I grew up in the kind of like my family had like a kind of like the Boy Scouts, but it wasn't the Boy Scouts that we would do. And we had the sash with all of the patches on it, you know? And my mom would push us to get all these different patches. Like, let's try these skills. Let's get it. This is what you got to do to get the patch. And we were like double patch, you know, sashes. And one of the coolest things was being able to wear that badge, to being able to wear that. Because, you know, like, I know how to tie knots. Not great at it, but I know how to do it, you know?
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a good thing to have something physical to show for your work.
No.
I think it's a good constant reminder that you've done something.
Yeah, great. Well, it also is kind of a reward for giving yourself permission to try. I don't feel like as adults we get enough trophies for trying new things. Like, you know, when you're a kid, you know, you get that reward of some sort. You know, you're at finishing class today. We're going to learn to say the letter F, and then you take home that, you know, sticker from your teacher, and you got the big thing that you take home. But now, you know, it's like, we're going to try coding. There's no one patting you on the back. There's no one saying, here's your sticker for today. It's just an internal thing. And I think that as adults, we need that more, you know, whether it's something that we give ourselves or society doing it for us, because, you know, there's no reward for creativity right now.
Yeah, you definitely have to take it upon yourself to push forward with that. Maybe that's what separates creatives and non-creatives.
Right.
Sure, maybe it's that kind of thirst for creating something. But yeah, oftentimes that's always without recognition. So I think you really have to enjoy what you're doing, and find personal value in it for yourself, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that you're right. That's what I think anyone can be coached to become creative. And I think it's something that you train into, that's trained into people from an early age. I really think it's how people are raised, you know. But I do think there are then some of us that, and I'm putting myself into this category, and I would assume that you're in this category too, just from our conversation, that have a thirst for it, that have a hunger. I remember when I was a kid, my favorite show was a TV show called This Old House. And I don't know if you ever heard that. It was a Canadian guy that would go and they would just buy these old houses, and it was like one of the first flipping the house thing. But like it wasn't as this old, you know, house was much more like they would take an entire season to redo one house. Like, today we're gonna learn how to rebuild a banister, and like it wasn't like, you know, with a lot of the flipping house shows now, it's like, all right, we're gonna make this place, and it's superficial. Like, you know, it's like, you know, they don't redo this space. They actually just, you know, put a cover on it. You know what I mean? But with this old house, like, he's like, oh, okay, this banister, this handrail on the stairs is chipped. We're gonna figure out how to make an exact replica of this. And it's like, and they would go in and just deep dive, you know, into how to do that. And to me, I was just like, this is awesome, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's learning something new.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a powerful thing. I think, like, again, we've talked about obsession. I think that's where that lies for me. It's really going deep on something that you know nothing about and being exposed to that. And just having that become part of your day or the next month or the next year.
This came up in my last podcast, the idea of, you look at some of the great explorers in human history, you know, and people who did things that were revolutionary, you know, or went to places that were, you know, the first person, because there had to have been a first person to do everything, you know, and it might not have been one of the great explorers, you know, it might have been just simply, you know, some, you know, hunter-gatherer who was like, hey, I'm going to go see if I can find an elk on top of that mountain, you know, and he climbed to the top and was like, wow, beautiful view, Now I go find elk, and it's like, but yet there was this understanding and appreciation of trying new things, and you look at some of the 1900s. There was this, 1900s, was it? Was it the 1800s? There was like a grand age of like explorers, and these guys, like, we will now go to the North Pole, and like there was a bunch of people from different countries that were all trying to go to the North Pole, and and so many of them died. But you when interviewed, they would ask them, why do you do this? And they're like, because it's there and we haven't experienced it yet. And that's important to do. It's important for us to do that. And to me, I'm like, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely an extreme example, but I think it holds true though. Because it's there, I like that. That's a good mindset to have. It's a good justification to just not just be, but try new things.
Yeah,
as good as you can.
Yeah, exactly. It can go both ways, But I do think that it's the idea of a deeper understanding. Someone once asked me, like, do you wish you could live forever? And my answer is always yes. And they're like, why? Are you afraid of death? I was like, no. If I could live forever, there would be one reason why. Because I want to know why. Why everything? I want to know as much as I can. Like, I would love to understand this. Is it a video game? Am I a character? Like, what is all this,
Yeah. Definitely.
There was a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, it got me thinking. It's so existential. Like, that's, I think, a big part of the human condition. It's it's trying to understand what all this is and make sense of it.
But the beauty, though, then too, it comes back to like the human ability to take these existential things and make something tangible. Like, think about any of the great instruments, like the piano. Wire that has been stretched very tightly and is getting hit by a felt hammer, right? And creates this tone. And there are enough of these metal wires were stretched inside of a box with enough hammers that were activated by levers, and you create this beautiful instrument. And I mean, that is the tangible side. But then there's nothing tangible about how Chopin or Liszt or any of these other famous pianists went about what they were then able to do with this thing. That, like, there was someone who was tinkering, but then there was this person who became this masterpiece at this object. A Stradivarius violin is an absolute work of art. But even if you handed me a Stradivarius, I'm not going to make it sing. I'm not going to make it sing. Yeah, right?
Yeah, I think having those objects as well, like, it's almost like the butterfly effect and what that does. I mean, Chopin can sit at it and play amazing pieces, but just building the piano itself, what that's kind of done, it's a fixed instrument that has fixed pitches that's kind of influence music beyond that time, and will continue to do so because this one object has been built.
And it's something like as simple as like that you don't think about, like it's something like the whammy bar on the guitar, who was like saying, hey, I've got this idea, and like add the tremolo, and it now is just a thing that we assume. But there was this great picture, and I talk about this all the time. Like, there was this picture about throughout history what people thought was ruining music, and then like 1490, the piano, like 1700, the violin, And like as these new things came along, people push back against it. There's always pushback against new things, and it's just this very interesting phenomenon where humans we fight with things that then become standard.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it definitely goes both ways. I remember I read this book about the history of the recorder.
Oh, interesting.
It was a super dry read, but it was very interesting that basically it came about all these kings were having this feud. They wanted a bigger recorder orchestra than the other. So instead of adding more players, they started building bigger recorders, smaller recorders. They started to shape that to something else. And how it's kind of developed over the last 100 years, we've basically got the flute from that, the saxophone, clarinet, all these different things from just this recorder.
And like the irony is like all of it spurned by human ego. Each king wanting to have a bigger orchestra.
I think that's hilarious that the royalty feuding over who is the bigger recorder orchestra. Today that's laughable, but then that would have been
at that time it was a big deal. Yeah, like, oh my, Leopold, what is that thing? It's a saxophone. Oh, it's like,
yeah,
we must create something new. Call Charles. It's like, yeah, I want it bigger.
Crazy.
The bassoon. It's like, it was something as simple as that. Like, that's awesome.
And then today it's just something that like 5-year-olds pick up in music class. It's right. The history of it's long forgotten, but it's the butterfly effect again. It's just had such an impact on how we hear and how we perceive music today. All the technology that's coming out even more so, like it's all kind of stemming from these so super simple objects.
Right. Well, one of the things too with the recorder too, and you look at, first of all, those Yamaha recorders that people had when they were kids are indestructible. We still have mine, and my daughter plays on the one that I had as a child. And of all of my old stuff from my childhood, didn't age well. That recorder has not aged a damn day. She was playing it yesterday. It sounded the same. Kids are using it as a drum and stuff still, just like I did. Indestructible.
Yeah, I think maybe in the future it'll be something that comes back a bit more dominant. I know Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead, that's his favorite instrument.
Well, did you hear the new Mandalorian soundtrack? All different recorders.
Yeah. That was unexpected. I think I'm on a Facebook group with the guy who composed that, and he was talking about it. Everyone was just blown away.
That's awesome.
I think about how he composed it, and he just pulls out a recorder.
It's awesome. But I mean, again, the beauty of music is it's not just the thing, it's how we interpret the thing, and the beauty of one of the things that's going back to that sound is there had to have been, an early caveman who took a stick and hit something and said, oh, this is special. But again, it wasn't that person who then turned it into music. Like, there was the discovery of that sound, but then there was the artiste who took it to the next level. And so it's like again, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Everything that's created in history has been kind of an evolutionary process as it continues as we continue to create art.
Yeah, there's definitely a thirst for trying to be that person almost. I think there's a lot of musicians trying to take something to the next level. Like the movie Whiplash is a classic example. It's got to be the first drum line. Especially in jazz, I think that's a big thing. People looking at new ways to approach things. Like I know Coltrane wrote this book. I'm fuzzy on the name. I want to say Rimsky-Korsakov. I might not be getting that right, but he wrote this like manuscript of approaching scales in all these strange ways. like mirrored images of each other. So you might go up one way, might come back down a different way. And apparently Coltrane loved this book. Like, he used to spend hours and hours and hours just running through these just strange scales. And he threw that into his music. So that's crazy.
All right. Coltrane's another level, man. Yeah. Well, brother, I have appreciated this conversation, man, and it was a deep dive into some fun stuff. I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you for coming on.
No worries. Thank you for having me.